talk about mutual aid a little bit. I've heard others explain it as solidarity, not charity. What exactly is mutual aid? How do you define it and differentiate it from what we more traditionally understand as charity?
So the premise of mutual aid, and something that someone said to me that I think is so important for understanding it, is the idea that communities have been surviving and thriving for a long time, without any, external help or support, without traditional charity that we think of. And I think there can often be a very well-intentioned instinct to come in and fix a problem, or even if you're not saying it, kind of, you want to save people. You feel like you they obviously don't know how to fix the problem, and so you are there to fix the problem. In this case, this I would be someone with more means, whether that's money or time or whatever, resources, connections. But the truth is that a lot of the time people know exactly what the problem is and exactly how to fix it. They're just being barred from the resources to do that. Not everyone has the same shot, but we're kind of conditioned to believe that people do. It's part of the American ideal is everyone can make it if they try, and that's just not true. Not because people are worse at things than other people or lazier or whatever, but because they're being blocked from accessing resources and capital. So the idea of mutual aid is that everyone has something to contribute, and that within a community, we have everything that we need to be successful, and not just be successful, but for everyone to thrive. There doesn't need to be, these intense divisions in terms of income or access, or like some people have housing and some people don't. We have everything that we need, and what we need to figure out is how can we support each other in that way. It's just kind of like taking care of each other without expectation, and with an understanding that other people can provide just as much for you as you can provide for them. So trying to remove that power imbalance between, I'm giving you this as an act of charity because I can and you should be grateful, and turning it into, hey, I have this thing and I can give it to you because you're part of my community, and you can give something back to me, because we are on the same level and we have an equal responsibility to care for each other. So that's what mutual aid really is. And kind of how it started with this network, at least, was the idea that, like, I would see a lot of people who were like, oh, well, I can go and buy groceries for people, or, I have all of this a lot of extra toilet paper. Like, we all remember how that was. And I want to get it to people who need it. And, I can babysit, I can run errands, I can do this, and figuring out how to connect those people with the people who might need help, with the understanding that that doesn't necessarily mean that that person owes you anything, or that you feel a sense of superiority over that person, even if you don't know you're feeling it. So one example is, like, within the mutual aid network, we have recipients all the time who then become volunteers. So someone will have groceries delivered to them one week, and then the next week will do a grocery delivery, or, gets the emergency cash because they need it to get through to the end of the month, and then donates back into the pool when they're able to pay their bill or get their paycheck. So that's really the difference between a mutual aid model, which I should say also is like a long standing practice that's like steeped in theory and history, and has been studied and explained by a lot of scholars and organizers and activists with a lot more experience and knowledge than me. And there's a lot of really interesting work out there about it. You don't get a tax break for doing mutual aid work, basically. It removes the individual incentive and the power, and really emphasizes that in a community, everyone is accountable to each other.
Is mutual aid a generational response to the more traditional nonprofit model? Is that model broken? Is this what we're moving towards in the future?
Part of why it's existed forever and there is all of this history to it is because it's formed out of necessity in communities that are experiencing oppression and being oppressed by a system. So communities of color, communities in poverty, disabled communities, like places where it's necessary within your community to figure out how to distribute resources in a way that keeps everybody safe, because everybody is experiencing this oppression, right? Is experiencing this fear or this lack of resources, whatever. And I think that kind of two things are happening, which is a lot of people who maybe have never had to experience that kind of oppression before started to feel it with the onset of the pandemic, and started to see that actually, they could lose their jobs, or, their neighbor could lose their jobs, and that actually they weren't as insulated from these social and economic consequences of a system that is really built around the accumulation of capital, which is to say that, like, it's all about the money. Like, we aren't really incentivized to care for each other. We're really incentivized to protect ourselves and our immediate nuclear families, and to make money. And that's kind of what we do. So I would say that that's part of it. Is there's just been an uprising, or just an increase in people coming to that realization and getting invested in that concept of community, who never had to be invested in it before, because they were very separated from, poverty and job uncertainty and illness, and all of these different things that have been happening on such a wide range because of the pandemic. And I would say that, at least, for my generation, I'm 28, I'm a millennial. And for my generation and the generation below us, I think that we've grown up in the in kind of, what's commonly seen as like a pretty raw deal in a lot of ways, or at least we think it is. It's nearly impossible to do a lot of the things that our parents were able to do, to get a house, you can get a college degree, but then you're paying it off for the rest of your life. It's really, when I was in college, everyone was like, good luck finding a job, no matter what field you're in. Those things are not available to us in the same way. And I know that those are hardships that other generations have had to deal with, but, the data bears out that it is getting worse, and it has been worse for younger generations because of economic and social factors like the housing crisis and that kind of thing. So I think that, coupled with increased technology and access to each other, like I remember when Twitter came out, I remember like Facebook when it first started, that has made such a difference in the way that not only we're able to communicate with each other, but the way we're able to receive information from each other and kind of say, oh, like, I never would have known this person in Iowa's story about, their college debt, but now I do. And we're able to communicate with each other in such a bigger way, along such bigger things, like experiences, than just where I grew up and where I went to school and where I work. Mutual aid is a radical idea. It goes against the system. It takes a system that is designed to work a certain way and distribute resources a certain way, and it turns it on its head. But at the same time, it's the easiest thing ever. I mean, the whole idea of like going to your neighbor's house to borrow a cup of sugar, that's mutual aid. Like, this has been in our consciousness for forever, but it's also a really radical thing to do. And it is easy to have it be absorbed into the existing structures that have been gaining power for generations, and that we trust for good reason. There's a lot of people who really trust traditional structures because they have been there for them before. At least how I feel is that we've been asked to make too many sacrifices that are no longer excusable. We've been asked to accept the fact that, like, in order to have a society, some people will have to sleep outside. And in order for me to have a job, other people can't have a job. And that this is just kind of the way that society works. And I think more and more what I'm seeing with my generation is people are hanging on to the idea that we don't have to do that, and things can be different.
So does that make mutual aid political or humanitarian, or both?
We can't separate the political from the personal and the humanitarian. So I would say that mutual aid is primarily a humanitarian thing. It's a community-based initiative. It is about community. It's not about structures, but at the same time, it subverts structures. It subverts politics, like traditional political structures, and that makes it political. Caring for each other is a political act. And especially in a society where it's not the default. That's not by accident that we've been alienated from each other. So I think, moving more towards those community-based models, there's nothing more political than that, but there's also nothing more steeped in just like a genuine human compassion for each other.
You made national headlines this summer. You and three others were arrested at a protest in response to Utah District Attorney Sim Gill ruling that the police shooting of 22-year-old Bernardo Palacios Carbajal was justified under Utah law. It is alleged that you purchased red paint, that you engaged in vandalism, and you intimidated police officers. And because the same district attorney, Sim Gill, applied an enhancement charge alleging that you and the three others operated as a quote gang, you were actually facing life in prison for a little bit there. And while I understand that you probably cannot discuss details of the case right now, can you talk about what the possibility of life in prison feels like and how it impacted your job and your life, and then also how it changes maybe your personal perspective in regards to the racial justice advocacy work that you have been doing in recent months?
There were a lot of protests in Salt Lake. I was there, with hand sanitizer. I would drive my car with the crowd and pass out water. If people needed a ride, I would give them a ride. It was really about taking care of people who were there. And so then I was arrested in early August, and I was arrested the day after my birthday, and I had been at another protest a couple days earlier in Cottonwood Heights, Utah, which is a much less, racially and economically diverse area than Salt Lake City. And there was a protest there for, in solidarity with a family whose son and brother was shot by Cottonwood Heights police. He was only 18. And I was pepper sprayed in the face as I was, trying to give people water. And then 3 days later, I was arrested. And I think that something that's really significant about my case, there are about 8 or 9 co-defendants on my case, and most of them are people of color, people who, one of the co-defendants on my case is 18, and she has the highest charges of anybody. But it wasn't really until I was arrested that people got really upset. And I think that I am obviously very grateful for like the support. It's horrifying to think about going to prison for the rest of your life. I went to jail for one night and it was awful. The shock that people felt and the anger that people felt goes back to that idea of power, that like because I volunteer in my community and because I have all of these nice, attributes that people in their mind don't think of as someone who's going to go to jail, that people think I should be insulated from it. And that's just not how it works, except when it is, because usually it is. But this gets to the political part of it, where once you start to fight back against a system and start to say, I think that we can do better. Like I actually really, really think that we can do so much better for each other. That is scary to people. And it's scary to the system that wants things to stay exactly as they are. So for me, I'm still facing charges. My charges were reduced after we made international news. But I am still facing felony charges. It's hard. And it's hard for my co-defendants. And I lost my job. I actually got fired the day after I got out of jail. The sacrifices are significant, but for me, I am in a position to make those sacrifices. And I think that comes back to the idea of giving, not in a way that's just comfortable, but giving until it's uncomfortable. Not just saying, okay, at Thanksgiving every year, I'm going to donate XYZ amount to the food pantry. And that's really all I'm going to do. But saying, what are the things that matter to me, and where is my community asking me for help? And how can I get engaged in that? Because I am being treated differently than my co-defendants, and I'm being treated differently than other protesters all across the country who have been jailed and who have been prosecuted for responding to horrifying deaths that we can all agree are horrifying. I'm willing to go as far as I can and farther than I think I can, for the sake of a cause that has asked me to show up. And that's really where, again, with the power dynamics of, I'm not coming in and saying, here's my idea, like, here's what I think you all should do. Have you tried calling your representative? You know, a lot of the time that's already been done. A lot of the time when we see these protests and we see these things that turn, you know, chaotic or result in charges, it's because every other avenue for change has been tried and has been met with resistance, has been ignored, or has simply just not worked. And people can't wait any longer. And so I think that coming to a situation and saying, what do you need me to do? And then accepting that at face value and not saying, actually, like, I think this would be better, is what it's really about in terms of showing up for people in your community who need you. And what I've found is a lot of the people that were arrested alongside me are also at the forefront of mutual aid efforts here in Salt Lake, are setting up open air shelters for homeless people downtown, are collecting donations, are making hot meals for people, are doing all of this advocacy because they really are very committed to that ideal and to that better world. And not everyone can do that. I'm not saying that everyone should go out and get arrested. I never intended to get arrested. I had no idea what was going to happen to me. But I showed up in a way that I believed in, and I'm going to keep doing that. And I think that that's something I want everyone to feel empowered to do, is to not be scared of, just not to be scared of believing in something better and of figuring out how we can get there.
There are people that want to help, people
Mhm.
with means, people with time, people with simply an earnest interest. What is the most straightforward advice or call to action that you would offer to each of those people? How do they get involved?
Give what is asked from you. Um, People are asking for what they need. And if you can't find where those asks are happening, then look for them. If you give someone $10, like, don't worry about what they're spending it on. Like, do it because they need it and because it's the right thing to do and because they asked you for it and they're a human being who is worthy of respect. Really starting to restore each other's humanity by being unconditional with each other, I think, is so important. Nothing has been more rewarding or more empowering to me than being part of a community that wants to work for something better. And that doesn't just have to be your physical community, it can be online, it can be in all of these different areas, but nothing has been more empowering to me. The work and the journey in itself is worthwhile. And that's what I think I've really found. And we have people all over the state who are involved with Salt Lake Mutual Aid, from all different kinds of backgrounds and belief systems. And I guarantee you that a lot of the people who work with us would not agree with me politically, or on a lot of things. But what we all are working towards is the idea of this, like, this world that prioritizes each other's humanity. And in order to do that, you have to let go of a lot of ego. So I would say, like, immediately redistributing resources is great. Like, give money, give time, give things where you can, but also, you know, doing the internal work of prioritizing that better world and imagining it and believing in it is so rewarding. And it's what's going to sustain you. Don't give up and give what's asked of you. And that's really all that we can ask of each other.